to our final public lecture of the semester with the Creative Industries series. And as always, we save the best for last. I'm very happy to welcome Hannah Weinberger to our little lecture series about professional paths that are interesting and can offer you an interesting insight on what you can do after you graduate from this program. So the Creative Industry series was conceived with the idea that it could show students of the Masters of Arts in Interior Architecture interesting professional paths once they finish their master's studies. And today we invite Hannah to tell us about her professional practice. She's an artist, so very different from other profiles that we've seen so far in this lecture series, but she's an artist that has a completely multi-layered, complex approach. She centers collaboration in her practice in a way that I find extremely inspiring and interesting. And she works in a variety of, media, and her installations always have a very strong spatial component to them. So I think it's extremely interesting to learn more about her and her practice. I am, of course, very, very inspired by her work, and I hope you will be as well after this lecture. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Hannah and mute myself in the middle of this busy square. Thank you, Hannah, for joining us.
Thank you, Vera, for the introduction and also for the invitation. And I hope English is okay. I was just, my French isn't anywhere, so excuse me for this. Yes, hello everybody who's listening and watching. It's my honor to be your guest today and to have you as my guests as well, listening and watching my work, basically me speaking about my work. It's also the first time I maybe have to say I'm not like confronted with art students from the fine art department, but people that work with spaces specifically, mainly, I guess, interior spaces in your case. And so I will try to focus a bit on this. Hello, does someone want to say something? I don't know how we should proceed, if basically we leave the questions to this afternoon, or if you have a specific question about something I will speak about, you can you're free to put it in the chat or also unmute. I'm really happy to answer questions as well. As we're like in this bubble of Zoom where my resonance doesn't exist, it's just these kind of images, if there are a few images of you. And sometimes maybe if something was misunderstood or so, please just feel free to ask. And maybe I'm just gonna start with a project that I made throughout this COVID year, where I guess it was challenging for everybody who's dealing with spaces or without, to basically still think about what could be done or still kind of keep on with a specific inspiration without stopping the practice. I guess it was really a challenging year for everybody, but for me, there was like a very, very, let's say, in the first lockdown, there was this a specific moment where I thought, okay, it can't like stop, right? It's not that we're gonna wait for the scenario as it was before. There are a lot of things that happened that challenge us also maybe in a positive way, or we start thinking about actually spaces, communities, and communication in a very different, maybe more precise way than we did before, as we were using it as users, let's say the communication tools that we use, it suddenly kind of became this one channel situation. And I tried to think of a project where I really reflect on this and also activate existing spaces. And it basically, I'm going to show you the website of my gallery. I don't have like amazing documentation material as I did not visit the sites it happened, but I'm just going to outline quickly. This project happened via, it was basically an online 100-hour concert played by anybody that basically went on the website. And with going on the website, it was activated when you had your tablet or your phone. If you were basically on your way to somewhere and would open the website, the step counter on your phone would automatically be activated and give the impulse into a composition. And basically this thing wasn't enough for me to just keep it online, because obviously the sound that you hear from a website isn't amazing. Most of us don't use earphones or whatever, but it wasn't just that. I really wanted also to make a point that these existing, let's say maybe community organizations, art spaces, nightclubs, hotels still keep on existing. And there is a very big necessity of mine to highlight them and not just put it all online and just, you know, distribute sound online and make like a self-promotion concert or something that, wow, I did something for my CV or so, but it really can give an impulse, plus have an impact in these different places. So maybe to again go back, in the end of 2019, I had a show at the Centre d'Art Contemporain in Geneva. Maybe some of you have seen it, maybe not, doesn't matter. Anyway, this exhibition gave this impulse for this project. The title of the exhibition was We Didn't Want to Leave. And the website domain was we didn't want to leave.live. And it's funny because at the end of 2019 until beginning of 2020, and then when we deinstalled shortly after the COVID pandemic started, I really reflected on this show that was about bodies in space, about community, about Geneva, about that exhibition space and so on. So I started to realize, oh, actually this project was something that, or I was a bit sad that it didn't exist actually in the time through the pandemic. So that's why I kind of transferred this concept of that show into, there wasn't, by the way, the idea back then, into this other project that turned out to be a different thing. And maybe to again explain it. So there were about, I'm just going to say about 10, I didn't count them again, I don't have it in my forehead, but approximately 10 physical sites that were playing the sound that you would hear coming basically from the website, being fed in by human beings throughout the world, literally, the sound being distributed in these 10 different places that were at that time accessible to public. So there was, I just want to highlight a few. There was like a very amazing, it's a community center, but also artist-run art project in Bangladesh called the Gidri Bavli Foundation. That was happening in Bangladesh. Then we had a space called in Lagos. We had like a house, apartments in Los Angeles. We had a hotel, the Casa Pani in Mexico City. There was a space in Tokyo. There was the Payman Foundation in Tehran, which is a basically new independent art foundation. The Club All, which is known for subculture, very interesting lineup in Shanghai. In Sao Paulo, it was basically distributed in public space, but in connection to the Caracol Bar. In Paris, in Oslo, in New York, and I mean, they're different, very different sites. And basically what we said is you need a sound system, any kind, where you would feel okay with the sound, and take a projector to basically, and a camera, to basically project the bodies in the space onto the walls, which was just, you might say, like an interior, like just an aesthetic thing, but it would make something, it would maybe not empty the space, but maybe feel a bit more visually filled and not just acoustically. And also change something with the people going to the space. And maybe something important that I forgot. So it wasn't just about having the sound distributed in the space, but also in these different spaces, I obviously thought about, okay, why would then people go to these places if they could listen to the same sound or do the same from home or wherever? But we had like QR codes. Every space had a QR code. And if people would enter via the QR code on the same website, look the same, they would actually make the percussionist part, like the rhythm would be made on site by the people being physically there. So they could maybe relate to their actions, what they do with their devices, easier and a more playful than if you're just, feeding in, let's say, an ambient or more tonal component of this whole program. And what maybe also has to be said is that the whole project was, it was like a live concert. So there were 2 or 3 technicians, including me, in the back, making sure the website is running, the sound is working, and also tracking the visitors, not in terms of, surveillance, but for example, Bangladesh, if you go and if you open your phone in Bangladesh and you want to access the website, the connection goes 3 times around the world until they land on the website. Shanghai, difficulties, as we know, they had to go through a server in Taiwan. So we kind of were always in communication with these places, which really made it interesting for me in the back, basically, to think about this connectivity that we just take for granted. And we think, well, in Africa and wherever you can just access websites, but the connection and the time connected to that is just, it's a different relation also towards the global situation that we have online. So I'm just gonna share the screen with the website of my gallery, actually, where you see some images of the different spaces. Do you see the website?
Yes.
Okay. So so here you have these different spaces lined up, basically images, impressions by these different, how they install themselves. And really without restrictions. We even told the people, if you don't have a projector, don't project. Maybe also something said on the side, we did fundraise for this project because technically it was very challenging to develop something like this. Also not knowing how many people will be accessing the website, how much traffic. And here you see the phone with the website, basically, someone holding it. And you would see on this phone here, your motion, basically, if you would move, so you could kind of relate a bit visually. Here you have an impression at the bar. That's in, here is in Oslo. Maybe I'm gonna scroll a bit down. Maybe we find a video on the website here. Oh yeah, here. So this is in Bangladesh at the Gidri Bavli Foundation. Maybe something important to know, this foundation is up north in Bangladesh, so not in the capital city of Dhaka. And in that area, there are many different tribes and people living there peacefully together, but they don't have any devices such as phones or computer. So the people running this foundation that lived there, they brought their 5 phones they had an additional phone, which was then used as a modem to distribute the internet. And for the, let's say, 10,000 people that lived there, they only had the 5 phones. And people really they come and visit this center. It's culturally and socially very important. It has an important impact in that area. Also, also from an educational point of view, for the children, for the elderly, for the women, they do a lot of work through artistic practice. So what you see here is now kids holding the phones. They even made little bags to put the phones in, and they danced with those phones. Maybe you hear the sound. Here you see some women. This is in Lagos.
Oh, so cool!
In Oslo. Very short. Okay, maybe I just gonna stop here now with the so they're not amazing video documentations, but maybe you just got a little bit an impression of how these different spaces basically use this concept. And but also some highlighted moments didn't appear on this website. I have them here, but I'm not gonna show you now all the videos that the people sent to me. But I have to say it was a very touching experience. I didn't have any expectations towards what would be the outcome of this. But what really felt nice is that it was kind of a kickoff of something that could change or include different spaces. It was just a variety of places that we contacted. They were in my network or around my network, basically. And we did pay the people if they needed the infrastructure or other things, knowing that it's the pandemic situation. And yeah, maybe if you have any questions, let me know in the chat or so. Maybe I will go now into my presentation and show you shortly the documentation of the show at the Centre d'Art Contemporain. And just to give you maybe an idea where this project came from. So in Genève, at the Centre d'Art, there are 2 floors, right? And I had, let's say, the first floor, which is the second floor in reality. I had a big space, this one, where I had these cameras basically facing towards where the projectors would face, to the wall. And it wouldn't record, but it would give this infinite spatial experience and actually do something like, let's say, it would kind of activate something about this, the thinking of this space or the intention of this show or so. So it was basically just, this projection was just a little detail, but in this floor became kind of important. This is a video. I'm just gonna quickly hit play. Maybe another important information. So both floors had sensors where as soon as you would have a human being, but also an animal, entering the space, it would capture, let's say, would capture your warmth, your body, your physical existence in that space, and start the impulse of the basically randomly played composition. Give an impulse into this composition, and the show would be silent without any people, which is an important thing for me for this project, because there was no sound until somebody would enter. Maybe something else also to know. So the cameras were facing to the wall. So if you would, when you see the faces of people, they are turning their back to the wall. So if you're entering this exhibition, you always see yourself in this infinite situation from the back. So it doesn't have this mirror effect. Only if you turn around, the others would see your face, basically, your frontal appearance. So the funny thing here is that obviously people didn't maybe know technically how this whole thing works. So they would start moving around, dancing, jumping, doing different kinds of things in those spaces to kind of trying to activate the composition more and more. But it didn't necessarily have an impact on it, as it was just throughout movement. So there wasn't, you know, a signage saying you have to jump on your leg and this happens, but this is what naturally just happened in those spaces by encountering these empty spots. What is maybe also important to know is this floor was very erratic, was a bit in real life, was the experience a bit similar to if you enter a church, a lot of echo, And I wanted that. And then if you went a floor up, and here were no like percussion rhythm elements. If you went the floor up, you would encounter this space, and there were only percussion elements and also rhythm. So the rhythm and the percussion element were played randomly, but only obviously if there were visitors, and by the tempo, how they would move, it would kind of react, the whole installation. Obviously also depending how many people, how fast they move. So there were like, you only see one space here, but there were like 5 to 6 spaces like this chained onto another. And there was like no echo involved. So the whole baseline was very intimate in a way, the experience. Me, obviously also through this textile that I did hang, that appears in a lot of exhibition of mine. I use usually this molton, which is very thick and pretty cheap textile you can find. And usually I just hang it, and always in this wavy shape, like a curtain, to give it more an intimate context in a way. But this is a very pragmatic decision, because when I started exhibiting, I always was confronted with big museum spaces that acoustically were in a very bad shape. But or maybe bad is the wrong word, because I actually love these ideal spaces for sound, or love to work with them. But the reason why the curtains are white is because the walls are white. And as soon as I play with color, it becomes an interior aspect, and it becomes more specific, almost like a sculptural part of my work, which I don't want. I want like a very pragmatic decision being seen like in the plainest way you could imagine. So that's why usually if it's a white space and I need to add some textile to kind of bring down the echo, I use these. Just I think maybe it's important for you to know. So I'm gonna go to the next exhibition that I had before this. I'm going kind of backwards, where it was in a museum with approximately 22 spaces, the whole building. And I left all of the buildings empty, the whole building empty. And in every space, there was at least one speaker. And there were a lot of microphones inside and outside the museum. So here you see one hanging, where my little mouse here is, one microphone. And the concept of this exhibition, the title of the exhibition was When Time Lies. And the idea was to record constantly, day and night, what is happening in that building, in and outside of the building. Meaning, like, it would record people speaking about this exhibition. Even it was already recording when we were installing the exhibition. It would record the trains going by next to the museum, where there was like a main railroad where trains constantly were driving. And it would bring this into the museum and would be played out randomly in these spaces. So these recordings that it would make constant, and recordings of recordings, would be distributed. Maybe if you were lucky, you would hear the same recording in different spaces, but maybe you would hear this one recording when you entered, never, and it would be played a month later. Also, what is important to know, the toilets were recorded, the coffee place was recorded, the entrance, like the people at the desk when they would speak, were recorded. And I asked them to play radio, live radio throughout the whole, at the front desk, throughout the whole show time. For me, it was kind of an important component to bring in the timeline in this, let's say, 3 months duration of the show, or a bit less, no, 3 months approximately, and to kind of reflect on it. So if you would, for example, hear news from 1 month ago, you would realize, oh, okay, it was recorded 1 month ago or so. So here's a video, a video walkthrough of this exhibition. I'm not going to show the whole, but just to give you an impression. I want to blow up the image a bit. Yeah. Gonna scroll a little bit. Maybe here you see the drums. I asked the guards of the museum to bring their instruments because most of them were musicians. And I told them just jam and feel free to play if you'd like to. And they actually did play. So that's why you see the music instruments placed in the exhibition. I'm gonna scroll to the next floor. Actually hear my breathing, which is a bit embarrassing. So maybe one could envision it a bit as a ghost house. I guess this museum was never as empty as it was then, but also never acoustically as full. Technically, this whole thing was also pretty an intense work, although it's so immaterial, but it would basically store all these recordings, constantly recording, and we developed kind of a filter so that, because naturally, if you would install something like this after a week, you would only have the sound waves of the spaces, meaning it would turn into like woo, like a wave singing, a whale singing experience, where you only have like this tone, pretty intense acoustic. And we kind of made a filter that this doesn't happen. Although I would like to, I mean, at the time I would have wished to have this more radical experience, but I wanted to respect the fact that actually people work in that museum and are there the whole day. So I didn't want to turn it into this extreme noise, drony house that starts vibrating and seems like it's going to take off soon to the moon. There is like some question in the chat. The reason why I wanted to choose to play the recording randomly has on one hand to do with the data restrictions, and this wasn't required by the museum, but I wanted to respect the privacy atmosphere, for example, of people. Only actually the male toilet was recorded, but obviously if you would go pee-pee and then would leave, or basically you're peeing and there are visitors in the museum and suddenly everybody hears you peeing on the toilet, this would be kind of an invasive part. And I wanted that this might happen. Obviously you can pee and then in the next moment it's going to distribute, but maybe not, right? So I wanted this algorithm, this AI, to have an active role in this installation, basically really having it programmed that it can choose when something is recorded. So it would record always if it hears noises or someone entering or outside speaking, voices or whatever, but also to have it distribute whenever and how long the recordings. So it could decide between 30 seconds and 10 minutes of recording, but it could additionally after this 10-minute recording, record again. But these were basically the parameters for the algorithm. I don't know if I answered the question.
We have to see the teachers this afternoon.
Did you say something? No, that was
no,
me.
sorry.
Okay. So I'm going to jump to the next project. Here, just to give you a bit an insight, obviously we're speaking about my work. And so I thought to give you kind of an overview in a way of what other things I've done. So this was at Art Parcours, it's during the art fair in Basel, where they have this public art section. And it's always placed in the old city part, like in the medieval part of Basel, the most medieval part. And I decided to have in one main street where you come from the Kunstmuseum to the Münster, the big church, if you walk there, to use these let's say underground situations to basically have a parasite strategy to place sound inside of these sewers. And so people would walk randomly, but maybe also actively to search for art, and they would start hearing things out of these sewers. So what happened actually, funnily, so there were many recordings that I did on site, but I also included some other events that happened in that area. Let's say events like car honking, like ambulance sounds, but also cats and dogs, whining babies, and so on. So there were many of these. It was kind of a sound archive being played in these sewers, coming out from the sewers. What happened was that people started to call during the art fair week the fire department, they said there is a cat locked up downstairs. So they turned up and tried to research where this cat might be, but it was just a sound coming from there, which is funny. Nobody called for the babies or the children, but just for the cats. And I never would have thought that this would have been, you know, the outcome of this installation, because it was very subtle, but also in a way, I thought if you walk through the street, you realize that it's like an installation, right? So it wasn't me trying to be manipulative in terms of how people experience this installation. So this is just one impression. I'm not going to play the sounds now, but I tried to describe. Maybe here another project. As you saw in most of the installations that I now showed, there's always sound equipment involved. So there's always this decision of mine, what kind of speakers, how loud, but I don't even mean acoustically, but how present in a space should they be. The interest or the funny thing is that I have a lot of documentation of exhibitions with empty spaces with just these speakers. And if you look at them, it looks like minimal art. But in fact, the spaces are full of sound, but these objects become somehow present. So with this work here, this is also a little video I'm gonna show you. The equipment, so the aim of me was to kind of go away from this, let's say, traditional equipment and trying to think about and develop or work with material that is not made for vibration, for sound, etc. And and I wanted to have a sound work for outside, for the nature, for a garden, for snow. So basically, together with the sound engineers that are very important for me, that I work with now since more than 10 years, we developed a work, and it's still, so this work is kind of a continuous work. I'm still producing these stones if opportunities come. Up to now, we have in total 12 of these boulders, these stones, and they have exciters in them, so little kind of magnets that make them vibrate. So what we did is we made a hole, like a big machine, and embedded these magnets and basically shooting the waves into this stone, and this stone basically starts to be the membrane. So no holes, there's also underneath, it's closed, it can be placed in water or snow. It's completely closed, and the sound comes from this upper part of these stones. So again, I wanted to kind of trigger the spectator to kind of also welcome them to use them as sitting opportunities, and also getting aware of the sound environment where sound is being distributed, not just being, you know, sound distributed via speakers. So I'm going to show you the video where you hear. Do what you hear. Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. I just stopped the screen sharing, I think. Did I? I lost you. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, I can reshare again. No, I just wanted to comment on this. I mean, this is now specific, not very well documented installation, but the funny thing is this is the most material and heaviest work I've ever done, because one of these stones is 1 ton. It's like approximately 1,000 kilograms, and they travel the most. Funnily, usually I never have shipping involved. I come with my computer, or I come with a little team of people working as sound engineers or programmers, and that's how we set up, how we work, how we develop in spaces. And actually these stones are basically produced. And maybe what's important to say, there are 12 stones like this existing, and they're all made for each other. So they're not together currently, but their sound is like kind of, it's like a little choir or so. So this is also an important thing for mine. So basically, maybe also something that I could share. So the way how I think about things like my work or the decisions I make for exhibitions is like, because I work with different media. So it's not just sound or acoustic elements, it's sometimes visual aspects, as the textile you saw, but also more over like video or film projections. And I always see it in one house, and this house, this building is basically Hannah. This is me. So everything goes in this, but there's like this fine line where it somehow has to, one project with another has to kind of communicate. I'm gonna jump to I'm not going to go back to the other projects, but I'm just going to show you one little thing I've just done in a public art and public situation in a school in Basel. And it's the school bell I developed for a new constructed school. I'm just going to share the website basically of this school. 1 second. Just lost the link. Sorry, excuse me that I lost. So I'm just gonna maybe open up the Google image search, as I didn't find the link. So here you see this building. I didn't find the ideal image, but here you see it from the side when being constructed. So it's like 1, 2, 3. It's in total it's 8 stories, the building, and every floor has its own ensemble. So I recorded percussion instruments, wood instruments, etc. And every floor has its own ensemble, and via an algorithm with every basically ring that happens as the morning starts at 8. It's like between 10 to 15 seconds. There is a new combination of instruments playing an accordion and canon that I composed. So you hear in the staircases here inside of the building, you hear all these different instruments or these different compositions being played. On the rooftop, there is and that's where they have their breaks, or even outside. So here you just have the impressions from the building inside. But I wanted to share this quickly, that you know what also I'm working on, or that is more maybe specific to an actual place. It's kind of fixed, installed for forever, which is a very different approach if you plan a work like this than if you work with an exhibition space. So I don't know how the time is. I didn't speak about hidden bar, Vera. I can still continue. I mean, I can still bring another.
I think it would be great if you would end with the hidden bar, and then I have a couple of questions and then we can break, I would say.
Okay. So I'm going to share again quickly. Yeah. I'm looking for my keynote. One second. Okay, here you go. So the hidden bar took place, like the first edition of the hidden bar took place in 2018. And it was, the hidden bar was located inside of the art fair, Art Basel, which usually takes place every year. And basically the director of the fair approached me asking if I would like to make a project. And obviously I thought it wouldn't be in place to have, like, again, kind of a self-promotion, but to include all what is not possible for the organizers of a fair, which is basically ruled by a lot of restrictions, where usually the galleries, they pay a lot of rent, it has to be commercial, blah, blah, blah. So I knew I could present works of artists that aren't maybe embedded in this commercial art market as much, or would never have the access to it. And basically this building is kind of an historic, it's an historic site. And they always built these fair elements, like you guys know about this. They just, you know, pump up like from ground up, like they build walls, make all these kind of, create restaurants, lounges, gallery spaces, etc. But what we did, we used the color of the building that was already there and painted these walls red. And then everything else, the seating, as you see, is like bubble wrap seating, was by the artist René Levy, a local elderly artist. The plants you see is a work by Mandler Reuter. The lamps are works by artists, etc. So here's another impression. This is the bar. Also here you have work by Mia Sanchez, the watches, the little things on the these glasses are works by Jerry Beebe next to the coffee machine, and so on. And every day at 5, we had a happy hour where we had performances, readings, and so on happening by artists. And here is like one little video of one.
Darling, please realize I'm not the one projecting your lungs. I thought I was fine, messing around, pushing my love, creating a love. Oh, baby, please realize.
What you see is the clock, the main clock of the main building of the fair as the window of this bar. Maybe what I forgot to mention is the hidden bar. It was hidden because you wouldn't find the hidden bar in any floor plans. No signage whatsoever, but it was in the most prestigious spot, actually. It was, in a way, yes, in a way, no. In a way, it was just by the facade in the middle of this watch. And on the other hand, in the back of the red walls, you would have the dishwasher situation of the VIP lounge, etc. That was behind that. So but the access was super easy, but still, that's maybe the reason why it was hidden. So what happened, I'm really going fast. I could go through even the vases are by works and the flowers and I could go through all the works, but I'm not gonna elaborate on that. But the next year, the following year, we thought about the same place. We had, again, they approached me, would you like to do it again? I then asked friends if they would like to collaborate on this. Again, the seating was made by an artist in Basel, Edith Oderbolz. She used like gymnastic balls and buckets and covered them with textile. She did. There were also sculptures involved that you see. But I quickly have to explain to you. So in this hidden bar, in that 2019 edition, the last edition of Art Basel that took place before the pandemic, we had approximately 100 films that we showed in the bar. So that's why we needed a curtain. We needed also the rug to bring down the acoustic and to give it a more intimate side. And the only window we had, we kind of cut out basically the curtain. And here you see there are a few impressions of how these projections looked like in this bar. So video film is a format, is a media that is not very well represented in the fair. And we did show a lot of very political work that would never be able to show in this context. And we had food that was made by a local team of young people, young cooks, and drinks. And maybe if you recognize this blue, what's their name? Balenciaga did a fashion show 2020, I guess, the beginning of where they took the same blue, it was exactly actually the same setting for their big show. You find it online. It's actually a pretty nice show. And it's funny because I was like, wow. And they included artists as models and so on. And actually we found out later that the team that made this whole thing happening was actually at Hidden Bar a couple months prior, and basically took our concept, which is fine, that's how things go, right? So they go to an art fair, they see something that inspires them, and it's not an artwork of mine. It's this Hidden Bar, but it's funny how these things develop into commercial things. Yeah. So maybe I'm gonna stop screen sharing. My mouse is gone. Whoa, my mouse is really gone. I can't believe. Yeah. Is that okay?
No, I thought it was great that you would end there, because I had a question for you, which was kind of my main question, and we don't have a lot of time for questions. So if anybody has a question, that are not in MAIA 4, I would ask you to ask it now. I will ask just one question, because I think that's also why I think your practice is so interesting to me specifically, is that, in all of these projects, you have kind of a very synthetic outcome, let's say. You could say it's a very sort of visually depured, very concise, very strong, very, very kind of very sharp in terms of the elements that are used and so on. But the networks that are created around it are so huge. The networks of people that visit the space, networks of artists that you invited to be part of the Hidden Bar, all of that is huge, and it's so much work. And I was wondering, how can you quantify it, like the time that it takes you to do this work? Because that is huge, and that is the collaboration aspect, and that is sorry, somebody's destroying something here now. That is the collaboration aspect, that is the network building aspect, that is the mix and match of different media and different disciplines and different techniques all coming together. I just wanted to ask if you could give a comment on that.
Yes, it's very huge. Specifically, this art fair, which is really the biggest art fair in the world and has a lot of connotations and yes, a lot of work networks, but I always try to, so wherever I go, if it's a museum, if it's an off space, if it's the Art Basel, I try to find the necessity of doing something. So what is missing, or what can I highlight, or what can I do? So for me, it's difficult to kind of add up, fill in some material, bring in some art, in all respects to artists that have this kind of practice, coming from a studio work, bringing it into an institution. My basically, how I work conceptually, it really tries to embrace all of these things that you just mentioned. It really tries to outline in a way what building is this? Who's going there? Is anybody going there? If yes, are a lot of people, and what is missing, or what could be a trigger? And often it's also politically driven without basically doing specifically political art. I mean, with the title of this empty museum, with the 22 spaces that I showed you, When Time Lies was the title. And for me, there is already kind of a critical aspect in this title and of this empty museum, which is full of sound. But so there is some kind of a radicality in it, but for me, it's always important to have an inclusive aspect, where it kind of opens the door to viewers or spectators that aren't maybe used to this kind of place, or it invites also people to look at things differently, but very subtle. So yeah, so I love it sometimes if people even say, hey, I have this thing I'm doing, would you kind of invite, like Mark Spiegler, the head of Art Basel, said, would you like to do something here? And then like, oh yeah, sure. And then I asked him, is this possible? And then, yeah, it is. So I learned through these mechanisms, but yeah, I don't know if it does answer your question, Vera.
No, totally. It's also about testing boundaries, which I think is super important, and working with what is there, you know, because this is also a very contemporary approach, which is you don't bring in too much. You ask, what is it that would make sense here? And that is a very kind of interesting approach, which I think is also very interesting for the students of this department. Maybe
also one little comment, just something that came to my mind. I had a very touching experience in Geneva with this Centre d'Art Contemporain show when it was closing, the day was closing, because I just came to be there. I didn't announce myself as the artist coming on the last day before the installment. And I entered, and there was a huge group of blind people in the museum. They brought drinks and stuff and readings, texts they wrote with their, and they brought friends, and they didn't know I was showing up. And suddenly I said, hello, what are you doing? And they started touching me in a really very nice, welcoming me. They were like, you know, we spent every Wednesday in your exhibition, and we made these texts we prepared, and we were just about to gather them to then send to you as a feedback service. And what was touching is that obviously all these people, they had a variety of blindness. Some were completely blind, some were born, some were blah, blah, blah. And what was very special, what they told me, is that it was the first time they would visit an exhibition in a museum where they had the same ground, let's say, or starting point as everybody else. So there was no audio guide, there was no additional blah, blah, blah that they needed. They just entered a space, and it was the same but different, but same experience they could take from it. And they were also very critical in their texts in a positive way, but I didn't think of that too much. I always think of this inclusivity, so of people that are blind, obviously, if you think of sound, but I didn't, you know, it wasn't, let's say, my intention that a group of blind people would spend in a duration of 3 months every Wednesday in this exhibition. And this was very touching, where I actually fulfilled my goal in what could this place need. So yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. I would just ask, does anybody that is not from MAIA 4 have a question? I would just wait for a few seconds to see.
And otherwise, thank you for listening, everybody.
So we will meet again at 2:30 with Hannah and the MAIA 4 group, and everybody else. I would just say thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Hannah, for sharing your work, and we will talk more in a little bit. Yeah.
Yes. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you.